Right now, locked inside government vaults across the United States, there are approximately 18 billion pages of classified documents. 18 billion. And here is the part that should keep you up at night. Based on the mathematical patterns of how governments classify and then release information, we can calculate with startling accuracy what secrets are scheduled to surface next, and more importantly, what they are desperately trying to keep buried forever. The declassification of government secrets is not random. It is not arbitrary. It follows patterns so consistent, so mechanical, that analysts have turned it into a predictive science, almost like carbon dating for conspiracies. You set a clock running in 1947. You know what happened in 1947. The CIA was created. Roswell happened. The National Security Act was signed. And 25 years later, in 1972, the first wave of those secrets started leaking out. Then 50 years after 1947, in 1997, another wave hit. Bigger this time. More disturbing. Because 50 years is the second standard threshold, the one where governments feel safe enough to admit things they could never admit at 25. And right now, we are sitting at exactly 25 years past the year 2000, which means the secrets of the late 1990s and early 2000s, the dark operations, the surveillance programs, the things governments did after September 11th, are sitting right at that first release threshold. This video is going to show you exactly how the system works, why certain secrets get released while others get buried, and using the same analytical framework that intelligence historians use, we are going to predict, specifically, what is coming next. Most people think classification is simple. Something is secret, or it is not. But the real system is layered, deliberate, and built with specific time locks designed to outlast the people who committed the acts being hidden. There are 5 primary classification levels in the United States system: confidential, secret, top secret, sensitive compartmented information, which most people know as SCI, and special access programs, or SAPs, which are so restricted that most members of Congress cannot access them without special clearance. Each level carries a different expected declassification timeline. Confidential documents are reviewed at 10 years, secret documents at 10 to 25 years, top secret documents at 25 years with possible 50-year extensions, and SAPs, special access programs, can remain classified indefinitely if an agency certifies that release would cause what they call damage to national security. That phrase, damage to national security, is the skeleton key that keeps anything locked up forever. It is deliberately vague, it is deliberately subjective, and it has been used to protect not national security, but the reputations of intelligence agencies and the politicians who authorized their darkest work. Here is a number that contextualizes the scale of this problem. In 2017, the United States government spent $18.4 billion on classification activities, not on the programs being classified, on the act of classifying them. The bureaucracy of secrecy costs more than most nations spend on their entire defense budgets. The Moynihan Commission, a bipartisan government investigation completed in 1997, concluded that the American classification system had become, and this is a direct quote, a massive system of secrecy that served no clear national security purpose. Senator Moynihan spent 2 years examining the system and found that vast quantities of classified material revealed more embarrassment than genuine secrets. The government was not protecting national security, it was protecting itself. And this is where the predictive science begins. Because when you map what governments choose to release against what actually happened in a given decade, a pattern emerges that is almost too consistent to be coincidental. The 25-year rule is the most consistent pattern in declassification history. It appears across multiple democratic governments simultaneously: the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, suggesting it is not accidental policy but psychological calculation. 25 years is roughly the span of one political generation. It is long enough that most of the decision-makers involved in an operation are either retired or dead. It is long enough that the political fallout of exposure is diminished. But it is short enough that some witnesses are still alive to provide context, making controlled release more manageable than a chaotic leak. Look at what happened exactly on schedule. The CIA's MK Ultra program, The mind control experiments using LSD and psychological torture on unwitting American citizens was authorized in 1953. The first major declassification wave hit in 1977, that is 24 years. The second wave, revealing the full scope of the program, came in 2001, that is 48 years. Operation Chaos, the CIA's illegal domestic surveillance program targeting anti-war activists and journalists, began in 1967. Major documents were released in 1975, the Church Committee hearings. 8 years, not 25. Why? Because in this case, a leak forced the timeline. Frank Church forced the timeline. External pressure collapsed the standard 25-year window. This is the critical variable in the predictive model. The standard timeline is 25 years unless one of three things happens. A significant leak occurs. A major political transition happens that removes the protecting administration. Or enough secondary sources, journalists, foreign governments, academic researchers, build such a comprehensive outside record that official denial becomes untenable. The Iran-Contra affair began in 1986. Basic operations documents were released starting in 2011, right at the 25-year mark. But the deeper financial records, the ones showing how extensively the Reagan administration violated the Boland Amendment and what else the money funded beyond the Contras, those are still partially classified. The COINTELPRO program, the FBI's systematic campaign to destroy civil rights leaders, infiltrate black activist groups, and neutralize what J. Edgar Hoover called black nationalist hate groups, ran from 1956 to 1971. The initial documents were forced out by the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI in 1971, a group that literally broke into an FBI field office and stole the files. But here is what the predictive model tells us about COINTELPRO. The 50-year threshold on the deepest operational files would have hit between 2021 and 2025, right now. And the files that should be releasing include the full extent of the FBI's surveillance of Martin Luther King Jr. and what exactly the agency knew about his assassination. If 25 years releases the embarrassments, 50 years is when governments are forced to confront their crimes, and the 50-year threshold operates differently because by that point, official classification rationale has almost entirely expired. The operational sources are dead or burned. The allied relationships have fundamentally changed, and the cover stories have been so thoroughly dismantled by outside research that continued denial looks worse than admission. The Kennedy assassination files are the most visible current example of the 50-year pattern colliding with deliberate obstruction. The JFK Records Collection Act of 1992 mandated full release by October 2017, 25 years from passage. But the deadline passed, and the CIA and FBI successfully argued for continued withholding of approximately 15,000 documents. Here is what the predictive model says about this specific case. When agencies successfully argue past a mandatory release deadline, it means one of two things. Either the content is genuinely operationally sensitive in a way that still affects active programs, meaning the program never ended, or the content is so politically explosive that even at 50 years, the reputational damage is considered unacceptable. Neither explanation for the JFK files is reassuring. These events happened in 1963, 62 years ago. What could possibly be in those documents that remains operationally sensitive in 2025? The answer the predictive model points toward is not about Kennedy specifically. It is about what the documents reveal regarding CIA operations in Cuba, Mexico City, and New Orleans during 1962 and 1963. Operations that involved assets and methods that connect to other programs that did not end in 1963. Compare this to the British 50-year pattern. The United Kingdom releases its most sensitive material under the 30-year rule, which was itself extended to protect longer-running operations. But the real British equivalent of America's 50-year threshold came with the release of the Dirty War files from Northern Ireland. Operations run by the British Army's Force Research Unit in Northern Ireland during the 1970s and 1980s, where state agents were embedded with loyalist paramilitary groups who were then allowed to carry out assassinations. began surfacing at the 25-year mark, but the full scope only emerged at 50 years. The pattern holds across democracies. 25 years releases the embarrassments. 50 years releases the crimes. And beyond 50 years, you reach a third category entirely. There is a category of classified information that the standard timeline model predicts should have been released decades ago but has not been. And mapping where those gaps exist tells you more about what governments are actually hiding than any single released document ever could. Intelligence community historians call these deep black programs. These are not simply classified operations. These are programs so architecturally integrated into ongoing intelligence activities that releasing their historical records would expose present-day capabilities, relationships, or legal violations. The National Security Agency's domestic surveillance programs are the clearest modern example. When Edward Snowden walked out of the NSA in 2013 with 1.5 million documents, the predictive timeline model immediately flagged what his release revealed about the classification pattern. The programs Snowden revealed, PRISM, X-Keyscore, Muscular, were not new. The legal frameworks undergirding them dated to post-9/11 legislation from 2001. Under the standard 25-year model, those programs should have begun releasing documents around 2026, but Snowden's leak collapsed that timeline by more than a decade. And here is where the predictive science becomes genuinely alarming. If those were the programs that a 29-year-old contractor could access and remove, what are the programs that required 3 decades of agency trust to even know exist? The special access programs, the SAPs that sit above top-secret SCI classification, have a separate review process that is not governed by the standard executive order timelines. They are reviewed internally by the originating agency, which means the agency that created the secret is also the agency deciding whether to keep it. The Glomar Explorer is a perfect case study in how deep black programs work and what the predictive model says they look like. In 1974, the CIA used a ship owned by Howard Hughes, yes, that Howard Hughes, to attempt the secret recovery of a sunken Soviet submarine from the floor of the Pacific Ocean. The basic mission was revealed almost immediately in 1975. But the technical details of what was actually recovered from that submarine, the cryptographic equipment, the nuclear weapons design documents, the Soviet communications protocols, remained classified for decades, and some of it still is. Why? Because the technical intelligence gathered from that one submarine recovery shaped American nuclear strategy and submarine warfare doctrine for 30 years. Releasing the full record would reveal exactly what the United States knew about Soviet nuclear capabilities at specific points during the Cold War, which would in turn reveal current intelligence gaps and capabilities. This is the fundamental principle that the predictive model identifies as the primary mechanism for permanent classification. It is not about hiding past events. It is about protecting the inference chain. If you know what we knew then, you can calculate what we know now. Here is a revelation that disrupts the entire standard model. In 1995, President Clinton signed Executive Order 12958, which was supposed to dramatically accelerate declassification. It mandated automatic declassification of all documents over 25 years old, unless specific exemptions were claimed. The result was not transparency, it was panic reclassification. Between 1999 and 2006, the National Archives documented a phenomenon that historians call the reclassification scandal. The CIA, the Air Force, and the Defense Intelligence Agency systematically withdrew and reclassified documents that had already been released, already been cataloged, already been partially reviewed by researchers. Matthew Aid, an intelligence historian, discovered in 2006 that the National Archives had quietly removed approximately 9,500 documents from public access, documents that had been declassified and available for years. Some had already been cited in published academic work. They were taken back. The cover explanation was that these documents had been improperly declassified. But when Aid and colleagues examined the pattern of which documents were removed, something telling emerged. They were not random. They were specifically connected to 3 topic areas: human intelligence collection methods, signals intelligence collection capabilities, and joint operations with foreign intelligence services. In other words, the government released the documents accidentally, then realized the inference chain problem too late and took them back. This is what the predictive model calls a hot declassification, a release that exposes more than intended and triggers immediate reversal. The acceleration anomaly tells us something crucial for prediction purposes. When you see a sudden push for accelerated declassification, like the Trump administration's stated intent to release JFK files or congressional pressure on UFO-related materials, the actual result is frequently slower release of more sensitive material, not faster. Bureaucratic systems respond to political pressure for transparency by releasing the least sensitive material first, loudest, and most publicly, while simultaneously using the publicity generated by those releases to quietly strengthen protections around the genuinely sensitive material. This is misdirection at the institutional level, and once you understand it, you can see it happening in real time. Now we get to the core of what the predictive model actually tells us about what is coming, and this is where the analysis becomes most specific and most uncomfortable for intelligence agencies. The year 2025 represents a remarkable convergence of classification anniversaries. We are simultaneously hitting the 25-year threshold on early post-9/11 operations and the 50-year threshold on mid-1970s programs, while facing the 75-year mark on original Cold War-era activities from 1950. At the 25-year mark, the predictive model points toward the following categories of material: the full operational record of extraordinary rendition, the post-9/11 CIA program that transported suspected terrorists to black site prisons in countries where torture was permitted. We know the program existed. The Senate Intelligence Committee's 2014 report covered the surface, but the specific country agreements, the specific agency relationships, the specific names of individuals who were rendered and never publicly accounted for, those documents are now sitting at the 25-year threshold. The model predicts partial release in the next 3 to 5 years, specifically the documents that confirm what journalists have already established, while continuing to withhold the names of foreign government officials who facilitated the program. At the 50-year mark, the convergence is even more revealing. 1975 was the year of the Church Committee, the year the United States government was forced to acknowledge systematic assassination plots, illegal surveillance, and foreign election interference. The documents generated by the Church Committee investigation itself, the committee's own internal deliberations, their unredacted witness testimony, their classified annexes, hit the 50-year threshold between 2025 and 2026. The predictive model flags one specific document category as the highest probability significant release in this window: the full operational files on Operation HTL Lingual, the CIA program that opened and read first-class mail of American citizens for 20 years, from 1953 to 1973. The basic program was revealed in 1975, but the specific targeting criteria, who was selected, why, what the intelligence product was used for, remains largely classified. At the 75-year mark, we hit the earliest Cold War programs, the original authorization documents for programs that evolved into what we now know as Global Signals Intelligence, the founding architecture of what became the Five Eyes Alliance, the intelligence sharing arrangement between the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. The 1947 and 1948 agreements that created this network are technically available, but the operational annexes, the ones that specify exactly what each country agreed to spy on for the others, including spying on each other's citizens, remain classified in all 5 countries simultaneously. Here is what the predictive model calculates specifically. The United Kingdom's Public Records Act and the parallel American declassification schedules both point toward 2027 and 2028 as the window when those annexes become legally impossible to continue withholding without explicit new classification orders. The question is whether the agencies will file those orders, and if they do, whether a researcher will notice. No discussion of declassification prediction is complete without addressing the phenomenon that has broken the standard model entirely. The government's handling of what it now officially calls unidentified aerial phenomena represents the most extraordinary classification case study in modern history, because it is the only topic where the standard timeline rules appear to have been deliberately suspended. In 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence